Samhain is approaching us, and now is a great time to consider your relationship with your ancestors and to start working on them. So, whether you feel very connected to your ancestral lineage or you're not really sure about the people in your past and how they might influence your present day, our bodies, our hearts, our energy, all of this carries an energetic and ancestral imprint. So some of these pieces that we hold, these are our gifts, these are our strengths, some of them not even realized by us at this point. Other pieces that we hold from our ancestors are places where we can heal. So in tonight's episode, we are going to talk all about the ancestors, how to honor your lineage, how to release your inherited wounds, and how to reclaim the spiritual gifts that are yours by birthright. So merry meet, I'm Aislin, this is Ask Aislin, and tonight I'm here talking about ancestral healing and magic. So welcome to those who are joining us live. So we are going to jump right in, but if you're here live or in replay, leave a heart or a thumbs up. This helps us get it out to the feed of more people. And we're going to dive right in. So tonight we are talking about ancestral magic. And we're going to start by talking about the energy of the season. Why are we here talking about this tonight in particular? So as we are here as of tonight's recording, this is October 7th. We are a few weeks away from the start of Samhain season. The veils have already begun to thin. You may be noticing it already, and if you're not noticing it now, you'll likely start to notice it very soon. When the veils thin, a couple of different things happen. It makes it easier for us to connect to the other world, to things that are beyond us, outside of us. So this makes it the perfect time for ancestral work. At the same time, the thinning veils will also help to amplify your third eye and your crown chakra. Again, these are both energetic centers that allow us to connect to what is outside of us, whereas the lower chakras more help us to connect to what's inside. This will make it easier for us to communicate with the things that are beyond, including our ancestors, when the third eye and the crown chakra are open just a little bit more. So the other thing I wanted to mention, that as right now, if you're watching this live or you're going to be watching this in the next week or so, I guess I would say the next 2 weeks, we are actually in the second half of the lunar cycle, which means we're in the waning half of the lunar cycle. This will, as the full moon was yesterday on October 6th. So what you may notice is that it is easier to connect to those things and people outside of you, including ancestors, when we are in the second half of the lunar cycle. In a lot of ways, the second half of the lunar cycle will feel like the second half of the solar cycle, which is where we start to turn inward, we start to want to do inner reflection, and where we may find that it's easier to connect to guides, to ancestors, and also to deities. So let's start by talking about how to understand ancestral energy. There are different types of ancestral energy, and so what I'm really hoping is by the end of this episode, you'll understand how to view ancestral energy within your own life. You will have some tools that you can use to decide whether or not this is the time to do some ancestral healing and work. And then you'll also have those tools because I'm going to provide you with some ways to do that ancestral healing. Just saying hi to those who are joining us in the chat, those who've made it here live. Say hi in the chat. I already see some people here, Kurt and Cersei and Joanne, Mary Meet, Misty, Tommy's here, Cindy, welcome everybody. So while you're here live, also know that we have a Q&A at the end, so you can leave questions and comments, and we're going to answer everything as we go and at the end. So let's talk about ancestral energy. So what does ancestral energy really mean? So sometimes what happens is that people think that this doesn't really apply to them because they don't feel very connected to their ancestors in their bloodline. Or in some cases, they may feel that in particular with families that are highly Christian, and maybe you have experienced some religious trauma as you have converted to paganism, you may feel like very disconnected from this kind of work because you're like, these ancestors don't feel like my ancestors because I disagree or have had so much conflict with them over my religion or my spirituality. So I have definitely been in that place before. So this is years ago, before I really started to understand that ancestral work has many different pathways it can take. I kind of looked at my own family, and both sides, very Christian and very different than me. Seemed to me like there was nobody who was like me. I was the black sheep of the family. You may feel that way too. And so when I thought about ancestral work, I didn't understand how it worked, because here I would be connecting to Christians and then trying to do like my own work through the lens of witchcraft and Wicca. And so if you feel like you are in that same place, what I'm about to tell you, I hope will open up doorways for you, because this is what opened them up for me, is understanding the different kinds of ancestors we have, and we all have these different kinds. And then once I understood that I had ancestors that I could work with, I actually started to see that my own bloodline also had things to offer me. I just wasn't seeing them in that moment. Okay, so rest assured, if you are feeling ancestral work isn't for you because of that, I promise you that it is. So let's talk about what ancestral healing and work looks like beyond the bloodline. So obviously the bloodline is very easy to trace back. We have parents, we have grandparents, we have great grandparents. But our ancestors don't just include our biological ancestors, they also include cultural ancestors as well as spiritual ancestors. So Christopher Penczak, in his book, The Mighty Dead, which I highly recommend, this book, if you're interested in doing ancestral work, I would definitely check out this book. He spends a chapter talking about the different types of ancestors. So he starts with the traditional ancestors, which he calls the ancestors of flesh and blood, and he says these are our genetic kin. So these are the people that you think of when you think of the ancestors. This is your maternal as well as your paternal line. Now, Christopher Penczak talks about the mitochondrial DNA as being passed down through the mother's genetics, the matriarchal line. And so when we think of witches of old, you will sometimes hear, or you might see if you watched movies or you read about spells or different things in books, and we're looking back at witches of the past, there would sometimes be this naming of the ancestors. So I am, and then name your name, the daughter or son of, granddaughter or grandson of, and then the whole entire like line back however many generations is listed as, part of the ancestral heritage. So while it's true that the matriarchal line is often the one that we will express, especially as women, it's no surprise there are more, or it shouldn't come as any surprise to you to learn that there are more women who seem to be attracted to this path than men. I hope that more men in all genders are attracted to it as well. All have very important contributions to the craft. But I think that that's why the matriarchal line is often listed, is because witches of old especially tended to be women. So listing off mothers, grandmothers made more sense. But Christopher Penczak says that the paternal line is also important. And so he says that the mother's line is called the distaff line. This comes from, a distaff is like a rod or spindle that you could weave thread or silk on, or whatever you're weaving. And this is recited by witches sometimes, as I mentioned. But he says that the father's line, which is called the spear line, should also be considered equally important. So when you are thinking about your actual blood ancestors, you want to think back several generations. And as we go forward into the episode, I'll be talking, most of our sort of ancestral healing will probably be done around the bloodline. If you were adopted, it would then be done around the bloodline of the adopted family, but it could also be done on the birth family too, if that is known. But most of our work, our healing work, will probably be done in this pathway of our ancestors. Now, beyond the blood ancestors, we also have what Christopher Penczak calls the ancestors of milk and honey, and these are the adopted kin. So a lot of places that the adopted kin can come from. Sometimes people hear that and they think, well, this must just be If I was adopted, then this would be the kin of my adopted family. And while that is one pathway that the ancestors of milk and honey and adopted kin take place, other areas are through your friends and through your chosen family, right? So many of us on this path don't have a connection or as deep a connection to the blood family as we would hope that we would have, maybe because of disagreements about our religion and spirituality. But hopefully, we find through the path a chosen family that is also as important when it comes to ancestral work and healing as our blood family is. So, your chosen family will be like a coven, perhaps, that you are in, or a group, even a group like Body, Mind, Witchcraft, or if you're in our Shadow Seekers membership. Many people call this their family, these groups their family, because they feel more connected to them than to anybody else outside of their life, especially when it comes to the spiritual matters. So when our spiritual family, our adopted family crosses through the veils, they also become our ancestors. So that is another pathway to think about when we're thinking about our family or our ancestors, right? Now, another group of ancestors Christopher Penczak talks about are the ancestors of skin and bone. And these are ones that people will often forget, but this is the land kin. So, unless you are living on the land of your ancestors, going back centuries and centuries and centuries, which the majority of us are not, then you have landkin who lived on this land before you. And they are very important ancestors that you can work with. So, what I would consider is if you don't know who lived on the land before you, do a simple search. So put into Google or any search engine what indigenous peoples lived in and put blank and list off the city or the town where you live. And you're going to find out all of the different indigenous peoples who lived on that land. So, for example, I am living in Los Angeles, and the indigenous peoples who lived in this area were the Gabrielino Tongva people, sometimes just called the Tongva people, the Chumash, and the Tatavian. And so these three groups of people are very important to me because they lived on this land. And so, what can we do to sort of heal this lineage is that we can do research on these groups of people. Learn what you can about them. Learn about their struggles, because the majority of indigenous people were driven off of their land and had very much stolen from them. So learn about those struggles and really hold them in your heart, and you can help heal those struggles too. You can make differences here. Also learn about their accomplishments, learn about the things that they did, learn about the offerings, learn about the deities that they prayed to. Learn all of this, and you make a contribution to healing this part of the ancestral wound and the ancestral line. Find ways to honor them in ritual or sacred space. So sometimes you will join ritual spaces and people will call out the names of those land ancestors before the ritual begins. So I know with Starhawk's work, I've done a lot of rituals in person and online with her, and they always call out the names of the peoples who lived on that land before them as a way to honor them prior to the start of the ritual. So you can do that practice in your own personal practice as well. Name them during your rituals and find ways to offer to them as well. So another group of ancestors that we have are the ancestors of breath and bread. And so again, these are coming from Christopher Penczak's book, The Mighty Dead, which if you're joining us, if you're joining us since I showed the book, here's the book. In this, at least this section is coming from, I'm drawing material from this part of the book. So these are the ancestors of breath and bread. These are the story kin. So the story kin are the departed who share a connection to you through a variety of different paths. So one path could be through your vocation. So if you are a teacher, these are the departed teachers. If you are a mother, these are departed mothers. So anything that is your vocation, there's a pathway back through lineage that those are also your ancestors. They can also be ancestors of causes that are important to us. So if you are part of the LGBTQ plus community, these could be the departed LGBTQ plus people, right? If you are any interest that you have, anyone else who has shared that interest also becomes an ancestor to you through this pathway, the ancestors of breath and bread, or the story kin. And then there are also what Christopher Penczak calls the ancestors of spirit and soul. And these are the pathkin. These are the witches. So by definition, if you call yourself a witch, even if you're not ready to call yourself that yet, but you're sharing space with witches, you are connected to the witches of old. So these are also spiritual masters that have come before us, any witch who has come before us, and also spiritual people of various traditions. So if you feel connected to certain traditions, for example, I feel very connected to the Hindu path, even though I'm not Hindu. I work with Hindu deities. I do a lot of Hindu practices in my own craft. And so these could be spiritual ancestors of Hinduism as well. So whatever your pathway is, whatever whoever you feel connected to spiritually, or the different paths that you choose, these are also ancestors of yours. And then a final group of ancestors that Christopher Penczak does not talk about in the book, but I do think are important, are the ancestors through past lives. So there is vast evidence that suggests that we do not reincarnate into the same family line and the same culture every time. So if you have done any work with past lives, you may find, there are past lives that seem to be in the same culture or even the same family that you're in right now. But you may have visions and memories of past lives that come from a variety of different cultures. And this can help to explain why we are drawn to deities of pantheons that are far away from us. It could be that you lived in that culture in a past life. So you can explore ancestry through your past life. So for example, if you know that you have a past life in Egypt, then you can explore ancestry through the Egyptian lines as well. Honor the ancestors of cultures that you feel connected to. And when you approach this through researching and learning what you can and being knowledgeable in this, and you approach it with reverence, this does not equal cultural appropriation. Because you are approaching it with honor and reverence, and you're doing your research, and you're doing it the right way. So I just wanted to put that out, because sometimes people are afraid to even work with deities of other cultures or learn about things because they're afraid they're not allowed to. But I really do feel, I know from doing my own past life regressions, I have lives and timelines in a lot of different cultures. And I know that explains why I am connected to practices from these other cultures. But the key here is doing research also about the people who are from that culture, learning as much as you can as well, so that you become part of the healing of all of this. Okay, so let's move on to the next part. So we're going to talk about how is ancestral energy transmitted, how is it passed down, and how could it show up in your life. But if you are live, especially if you are live, share with us which of these ancestors do you feel the most connected to when it would come from your work, or when it comes to the work that you would like to do. So when we have engagement in the live, it just helps this get out to the feet of more people. So we'd love to hear in the chat what you connect to. And just saying hi to a few more who are joining us. I see Andrea's here, and Cheryl, Mary Meet, Kelly is here, Amy, Rebecca, Mary Meet, everybody. Amy says she swears that she was switched at birth. And Cheryl says she knows what she means. I have had that fantasy myself. I'm fairly certain now that I was not, but I definitely resonate with what you guys are saying, because we may feel very disconnected to our family, or we may have a lot of trauma that we're working through, and we may feel very different. But the reality is we're probably not switched at birth. And sometimes, when we feel that way, this is what I personally believe, is when we feel that way, that's where it's even more important to do the ancestral work. So that's why I started doing it, was because I felt so disconnected and I had this fantasy of being switched. Saying hi to Aislin is also here. Amy says the area I live in was originally lived on by the Sac and Fox Native Americans, also known as the Sauk and Meskwaki tribes. Yeah, so it's good to know the lineage of the people on your land. So Misty said this is probably an odd question, but how do you work with the ancestors of the land you're on? If you live on a land that had slaves on the property, I'm sure that would be quite a few angry or sad emotions. Yeah, so you can, honestly, any land that you live on probably had people enslaved on it at some point, at least had people who were persecuted and driven off of their land, especially in the United States. And that's where most of our viewers are from, so I will speak of that. But I think that the best way is, to learn the stories, learn the history, and honor them. This is like, we can help do this healing work. Like every bit of honor that we do and reverence that we have for people who've come before us, that can help to heal this. So you can leave offerings, you can sit with the sadness, you can acknowledge it. That is one of the most, as we get through, like when we get towards the end, I'm going to give you kind of general ideas of how to honor ancestors and work through ancestral healing. And this will also apply to the ancestors of your land. But not an odd question at all. It's an important one. Because I think that a part of this ancestral work is acknowledging the history of the people who lived on the land before us. Joanne said, my mother, she was Wiccan and she taught us some Druidic culture. Yeah. And it's great too. Like sometimes we have ancestors who don't teach us any of that, right? That's probably the majority of us. And then we're so blessed when we do have ancestors and parents who pass down those stories, right? And those practices to us. Andrea said, how do you work with ancestors you know nothing about? She said, I know nothing about my ancestors past my parents. So I'll also talk a little bit more about that when we get into the ancestral work. I think that what I'm hoping with this episode is that you could see that there are other types of ancestors you can work with. So sometimes people will just sort of negate ancestral work because if they're in a boat like Andrea, they don't know anything about the ancestors past their parents. They're like, well, there isn't really any work to do. There is work you can still do, but you can also do some work on these other ancestral paths and see what that opens up for you. As far as working with ancestors you don't know much about, first step would be to see if you can find anything out. So there is, ways that if you're into like ancestry, so like my dad is really into ancestry, and he has traced back my mom's side mostly and found they go all the way back to areas in Wales and Cornwall and anyway, he's learned a lot of stories of these people through this ancestral kind of research he's done. So ancestral research can be one way, but when we get into the practices, I will explain some other options that you can try as well. Let's talk about how ancestral energy is passed down. So it can be passed down through belief systems. So the belief systems that you have ingrained in you, some of them came from your parents, and those belief systems came from their parents, that came from their parents, that came from their parents. So actually exploring our own belief systems already starts to tell us a bit about our ancestors, even if we don't know like the stories of them or anything. Your belief systems that you inherit, and, not the ones that you necessarily change, because as you grow and you mature, you're going to change your belief patterns and your belief systems, but at least the ones that you kind of grew up with, those those are a key to some of your ancestral work and your ancestral lineage. Other ways that ancestral energy can pass down is through trauma responses. So trauma from one generation to another will get passed down. Trauma can also get passed down in the womb. So mom's trauma that she carries with her can get passed down into baby, and then the baby carries that trauma. Emotional patterns that seem to exist within the family unit are also ways that ancestral energy can get passed down. But we sometimes forget about the positive side of this because also our spiritual gifts get passed down. So sometimes they're veiled. We don't see them. So, for example, I don't know a ton about my ancestors other than like some of the work that my dad has done. So that is going to be a big thing for me to read some of that when I'm ready to do that work and kind of see what I can learn about them through that. But one of the things that I have realized, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, is I do think there are some spiritual gifts that got passed down from my family. I just negated them because I couldn't see them at the time because I didn't understand how to look at it the right way. There can also be generational trauma. So, again, patterns that exist in one generation will get passed to the next one through both blood and energy, and also through just simply existing. They get passed down because we observe, children observe what their parents and aunts and uncles and grandparents are doing around them. That gets ingrained in them and it gets passed to the next generation. So there becomes this like energetic echo through the generations. So one of the things is when we sort of step out of that, like otherwise the transmission's just happening without anybody realizing it's happening. But if we step back from it, we start to observe it, we can change this energetic echo, because anything that you do in this life is going to reverberate backwards into the past and begin to heal some of the trauma that's there. And it also will reverberate into the future. Even if you do not have children, birth children of your own, your healing still will reverberate into the future lines of your family. So here are some examples too. So like if you have emotions or you seem to have traumas or different things that don't feel like they're fully yours, that is often an indication of one of two things, and it could be a combination, but it's often an indication of either it's coming from ancestors, or it's coming from past lives, or it's coming from both. So some of the ways this can play out is anxiety, guilt, scarcity. And the key here is going to be it feels as though it doesn't come all from your own experience. So let me give you a personal example of this, and I can at least trace this back through my grandma. I don't know my great grandmother. I didn't meet her, so I don't know anything about her. But my mom and my grandma both have. My grandmother has passed through the veils. My mom is still in this world with us, but both have these energetic blockages, which I've kind of realized are in the throat chakra. So my grandmother had a thyroid condition, which is very much connected to the throat chakra. And my grandma and my mom carried fear around using the voice. And so what I noticed is that I too have some of that. I have throat chakra issues, and I have fear of using my voice sometimes, speaking up. So will sometimes come as a surprise to people because I do all this talking all the time and teaching. But I have had to get over great hurdles in order to do that. So these issues, are coming from the maternal line. And I don't fully understand, without exploring the more of this, and this is part of my own ancestral journey, my own ancestral work, but this would be something that gets passed down to me that doesn't fully feel like mine. There's also this sort of pervasive fear that my grandmother always seemed to carry, that my mom, I feel, seems to carry now, that I feel it in me sometimes too, and I felt it ever since I was a little girl. And honestly, it doesn't all feel like mine. So that's going to be an indication that you're carrying something that's probably ancestral. I feel that there are also on my paternal line, through my dad's side of the family, there are also a lot of secrets. So you can sort of trace back, like I see generation to generation, there are always people keeping secrets from each other. A lot of times because they're afraid of what people would think if those secrets were revealed. So my uncle, who is in this plane with us, he is gay, and he has kept that secret from most of the family because we come from, the family comes from rural Indiana in the cornfields, and this just wasn't acceptable. And through fear or whatever else it is, in my uncle, he had to keep this secret. But I see that also in my own life, because I have to keep my religion and my spirituality a secret. It's very painful, and I know it's very painful for my uncle too. And so you can trace this back. If you see a lot of secrets in the family line, that's going to also be an indication that there's ancestral trauma that's being transmitted down. And then if you can start to work with those secrets, at least your own role in secrets and how they play out in your life. This is just my example, but whatever your example is, you can insert it here. Then you start to do the ancestral work that way. So how would ancestral trauma show up in your body? So it could show up in your body through chronic tension in parts of your body. Maybe it feels like you're holding a lot of energy in a certain place. It can show up as fatigue. It can show up as self-sabotaging patterns. There's a lot of different ways it can show up, but those are some ways it might. And then I think too, when we are considering ancestral trauma, ancestral work, ancestral healing, it's also important to remember that there's a psychological as well as a spiritual pathway, and usually those two are intermingling. So the psychological side of this are your inherited family systems. So that's all of the like emotions that go from one generation to another and then eventually to you. So like the secrets, like I explained, or the throat chakra and the fear, like all of that, that would be the kind of the psychological side of mine. We inherit those through our family systems, and we also inherit attachment patterns. So depending on how children attach to their families and to their parents, those patterns also can get transmitted down through generations. Now, on the more spiritual side of this, we also have the idea of soul contracts. So there are soul contracts that we each create before we incarnate, and we don't know what's in them. And if we knew what's in them, you'd have no reason to be here. So some of the people are very anxious to know what's in them, and honestly, they're revealed to you as you do spiritual work. But there can be soul contracts that perhaps you are here to do some healing in this area. So sometimes there are people who feel that they're here for lineage healing. They're here as that is part of their spiritual evolution, is to heal some aspect of their lineage. So if you feel very called to ancestral work and you start to notice those ancestral patterns, you are likely to be a person who is called, at least in some aspect, to do some healing in this moment, in this lifetime, that again, like I said, begins to reverberate backwards and forwards through your own ancestral line. Now, sometimes the healing work that you are drawn to in this life can indicate the healing that you are also meant to do for your ancestral line. And you may also understand your gifts and your blessings because you are here in a spiritual space. You are here with a lot of information around you that allows you to learn about things like this. And it could be that you are here to do work that your ancestors could not do because they did not have the tools to do that work. And now here you are with the tools, and not only do you heal yourself, but you heal your ancestral line. So before I go into signs that you have some unhealed ancestral wounds, I'm just going to go back to the chat and just see what's in the chat here. Cersei says she would like to work with the ancestors of skin and bone. She says she thinks that would be really interesting. Yeah, so I definitely recommend that you consider, which of these different ancestors do you feel the most called to work with. You don't have to. And by the way, too, I'm glad that Cersei said this because One of the things I want to make sure that people don't feel overwhelmed with this, you're not really meant to work with all of the pathways at one time because that can be very overwhelming. So I would suggest to choose one of the pathways. And if you're joining us later, you can always go back earlier in the video and we talked about the different kind of pathways that ancestral work can take and the different kinds of ancestors we have. Pick one path and work with that path for a while and then see what opens up in the other paths. So you may find that you get led to another one, but I would start with one of them. And Angela is also joining us. Merry meet. And Andrea said, I just read somewhere, while clearing your generational trauma, do not forget to claim your generational strength. Exactly. And that's what we're also going to talk about a little bit later, is this isn't just about trauma. It's not just about the bad stuff. This is also about the good stuff that oftentimes is blanketed or hidden from us. And so there are also strengths that will come from our various ancestral lines. Andrea said, I can relate to what you're saying about not speaking my truth. She said, I feel that was a burden passed on to me. Yeah, so if you sense that there is a burden that's been passed on to you, chances are that has some kind of a connection to ancestral work. I don't know if you can see this stuff flying out, but baby Corey is going crazy over here. She'll probably come out on the screen in a moment, but she's going crazy. and her cardboard is like shooting out to the side here. So Kelly said, I haven't done much ancestral work, but I have pictures of my mother, grandmothers, great-grandmothers on my altar. Very good. We're going to talk about altars, and that's one way to work with our ancestors. She said, to connect to the power of the feminine lineage. She said, all of them are Christian to my knowledge, but it has never kept me feeling I needed to honor them as the women I came from. She said, I also suspect that at least two of them were more nominal Christians at best. She said, I have some journals, books that were theirs that have enlightened me to who they truly were. That's fantastic if you have resources like that. Because it's one thing, some of us will have this sense that there was more to our ancestors than meets the eye, especially if they were like nominal Christians, like Kelly is saying. But to actually have evidence that suggests, she says that they suggest they were healers, herbalists, midwives, spiritualists. And then she said, on my paternal side, there's so much depression and anger. So that would be definitely something that you could heal in the ancestral line. And she said, on my maternal side, there's addiction and lies. And that addiction and lies are also ways that the ancestral energy can transmit. And she said it will be a bear to do this kind of work. Yeah. And so again, this can all be very, very heavy work. So you want to make sure when we're doing this kind of work that we're doing a lot of self-care and we're doing it a little bit at a time. Don't feel like you are here to take on everything for everybody. And this is why I also say don't try to heal all the ancestral paths at once. Take a little at a time, see where that goes, take breaks from it, come back to it. Do some around Samhain. Take a break from it, do other kind of shadow work and spiritual work, and then come back. You can return to it at Beltane when the veil is kind of thin again. Andrea said, I believe I'm here to heal my ancestral lines, especially those of the women. And I believe that if someone believes that, then that is absolutely true. Then they are here for that work, 100%. Okay, so keep comments and questions coming, and if you're watching back in replay, I do go back later, and I will answer things and address things that we didn't do during the live. Okay, signs of an unhealed ancestral wound. Okay, so some of these are going to be kind of repeating some of what we've already said, but at least it's all in one place here. So patterns that repeat through the generations. So people have been kind of sharing some of that in the chat. I've shared a bit of that as well. So this can be cycles of poverty. So if we see cycles of poverty or scarcity that we trace from generation to generation, then that can be a sign, right, that there's some unhealed trauma in the ancestral line. Now, just because you notice that there's unhealed trauma in the ancestral line does not mean that it falls on your shoulders to heal it. So, don't miss me there. Just because it's there doesn't mean you have to do it, and it doesn't mean you have to do it right now. But it's all about acknowledging it and seeing it. Once you see it, sometimes just the mere just the mere thought of kind of thinking about it and acknowledging it and kind of reflecting on it starts the healing process and actually can be healing in its own way. But looking at cycles of poverty, addictions, like someone had mentioned in the chat, silence, martyrdom, anxiety, suicides. So if we see a lot of suicides throughout the lines or kind of unexplained deaths or things like that, those can also be ancestral trauma that is being transmitted. Now, there can also be emotional inheritance. So emotions that you feel that you have inherited through your ancestral line, shame, repression, unworthiness, fear of visibility. Now, some of this can come from the birth ancestors or adopted ancestors, and some of it can also come through that path that we talked about, which was the witches, right? So, because there's so much persecution of witches in the past, we also inherit all of that. And so you may find that there are things that you hold back from and maybe don't quite understand why. And that could be some trauma in that lineage as well. So the pathway of the witches. Let's see. What we also know is that, let's see, my cards just flew and I lost this card. Okay. Silence and martyrdom, like I mentioned. Emotional inheritance, shame, repression, unworthiness, fear of visibility. I said that. Okay. So let's talk about energetic and magical signs that you may have some ancestral trauma that you're carrying. So, feeling blocked when you are doing certain types of energetic work. So, a person had written to me about like something happening as a child when they kind of had a psychic moment and saw the death of, or knew that someone in the family had died and they knew it before anybody else did. And then because of like their response from the response from all the other people around them that were freaked out that this child had, had this psychic intuition, it caused like a blockage of the psychic gifts of the child. And so you may have experiences like that where like you had gifts, your clairs may have been open and turned on very early in life, and then people around you may have dampened them. It might just be like just subtle, or it could be very overt in that like they silence the child when their gifts are sort of displayed. They teach them that it's bad, things like that. And then unconsciously what that does is it teaches you how to block your own gifts. So fast forward into adulthood, and now you're here and you're trying to open them up and you're finding all these blockages. So it could be worth, if especially if you have a memory of sort of like having your gifts blocked or having them be met with people being afraid of them or telling you they're bad or something like that. That would be some big shadow work that I would work on. I would trace that back to where it came from, kind of understand that that is a moment in history, a moment in time that happened, but it does not have to be and seal your fate, because you absolutely can reclaim all of your gifts and your strengths. But that can be one kind of like, I wanted to give an example of like how gifts themselves could be blocked through ancestral trauma, or trauma in the lineage. And who knows too, it could, that particular story I told you about, I mean, that could go back generations. We don't know for sure. It could be a history of people who have these gifts who are getting blocked by the people around them because the people around them are afraid. And those people around them may have those gifts too, and they're afraid of their own gifts, and so they're blocking the child. And so you can see how this all transmits and how it then leaves us feeling blocked in our own abilities. Another way that these ancestral traumas can be transmitted through energy is through the resistance to claiming our power, or I should say signs that you have energetically, you have some ancestral gifts blocked. Resistance to claiming our power, our voice, or our spiritual identity. So again, this could come from our pathkin, which that's the pathway of the witches. So you may be experiencing kind of the trauma of the witches, in which case I would go back, I would watch last week's episode. If you didn't, episode 156 is about the witch wound, and it goes more into like how to tell if that's something that is affecting you. But this could also come from your own familial path. Ancestral dreams. So if you have dreams of ancestors, that this is a good chance that they're connecting to you, and they may be connecting to you in an effort to help you understand more about your ancestral lineage, or in to ask you to heal that lineage as well. Recurring symbols that seem to come in the ancestral dreams, feelings that somebody else's emotions or stuff isn't your own. So again, that is a sign that an energetic sign that you're probably carrying some ancestral trauma that could be worked with when you are ready. Now, there are, like I said, collective ancestral wounds in all of us who consider ourselves witches. They come from the witch hunts, they come from colonization, and they come from religious trauma. So, episode 156 will go into more detail about all of that. So, where does the healing process begin? So here's some steps. I think the first step is this is the first step. It's the acknowledgement and it's the awareness. So you're learning about what ancestral healing and ancestral trauma looks like. And then you are beginning to acknowledge where it is in your own life. And just the simple act of acknowledging it is work itself. So just because the same with our shadow work, we don't have to acknowledge a part of our shadow and then immediately fix it. That's kind of a patriarchal idea, like, identify the problem and fix it immediately. Sometimes it's like, let's sit with it. Let's notice the cycles. Let's journal on it. Let's go into meditative states. Let's do some slow work around this. And so the awareness starts that first step. And you can have awareness of a shadow wound or an ancestral wound for years, and not be ready to work on it yet. And then one day the time comes and now it's time to work on it. But the awareness and the acknowledgement and the education is the first step. Healing begins with your recognition. You can't shift what isn't seen. So once you bring it into view, now we have the ability to shift it. You can do journaling and quiet contemplation. So that would be my first step, is kind of, you're thinking about it, you're thinking about what we're talking about in the episode, and then maybe you do some meditative work a little bit later. Here are some questions that you could journal on, or alternatively, I like to walk and ponder and maybe talk into my voice memo on my phone. Other people might draw cards to see what comes up around these questions. So what patterns have repeated in my family? So think about that through your contemplation or your journaling. What patterns have repeated in my family? What emotional weight feels older than me? What emotional weight feels older than me? Whose pain am I still carrying? Whose pain am I still carrying? So this can be a good start as you're starting to acknowledge this aspect of your healing work. Start to just contemplate some of these questions or similar ones. Now, once we get past the step of acknowledgement, what would we do next? So we can start through compassion and release. And so what I mean here is that it is very important for us to acknowledge that in a lot of the time, our ancestors were doing the best they could, and they were working within the system and the world that they were born into. So people who are born into this patriarchal society, we have more rights now than we did, especially women, people of color, minorities, spiritual minorities, our LGBTQ plus community. We have more rights than we had before, and let's hope we keep those rights and don't have them taken away from us. But our ancestors may not have had those, they didn't grow up in the same place as us. So having compassion for them, even if there's like terrible trauma in the family, having some compassion around like the means of what our ancestors had around them at their time. Now, our compassion helps to dissolve our defensiveness. So if we're trying to do ancestral work and we're really defensive, we're going to hit probably a big wall and a big block with it. So if we have compassion, it will start to help us dissolve some of that defensiveness, and it allows the healing energy to actually start moving. Defensiveness, negative kind of clenched up emotions are going to keep the energy stuck. So you got to kind of have space and openness to work, right? So a simple ritual, light a white candle or a candle of your choosing and say, I see the pain that was passed down to me and I choose to heal it through love. And you can write a version of that that suits you to your specific needs. I see the pain that was passed on to me, and I choose to heal it through love. Now, I also wanted just to note that just because we are approaching this through compassion doesn't mean we're negating pain and bad things that happened to you or to us, or to anything that affected you. It's just, this is the way that starts to kind of dissolve some of the resistance and the negative energy. So if you're feeling a lot of defensiveness and a lot of anger, what I would do is I would probably work through that energetically first, see if you can kind of do some shadow work around the anger and how could we transform some of that, and then you might find it easier to return to that ancestral work you're trying to do. After that, some energetic tools that we can use for ancestral healing is you can do a visualization where you send light back through your ancestral line. So you can do this meditation, close your eyes, get into a meditative state, and you can kind of visualize the ancestors that are still here. So if mom and dad or anybody's still in this plane, you can sort of visualize them, or brothers and sisters, aunts, uncles that are still here, and sort of visualize light surrounding them and dissolving some of the ancestral trauma that they've experienced, and then start to visualize it going backward. And even if you can't visualize grandma, great grandma, great great grandma, just let what comes to you come through. You don't necessarily have to know the line or know much about what's going on to do a practice like this. You're just sending light backwards through the ancestral line with the intention of healing. You can do EFT tapping. This is energetic freedom technique, tapping for inherited emotions. So sometimes we think that EFT, for those who don't know, EFT is where we do tapping on certain parts of the body that activates energy meridians in the body. And then at the same time, we think about traumatic thoughts or limiting beliefs or different things like that. And the combination of the tapping and the kind of working through the limiting beliefs and trauma helps to release those blockages in the energetic and the emotional body. And so sometimes we think that can only be done in the present, but energetic tapping can also be done with our ancestral stuff as well. And if you're interested in learning more about it, if you're in Shadow Seekers, you're in luck, because on Saturday we're doing a whole workshop on how to do EFT tapping. It's a cool tool. It's very quick to use once you learn it, and it can have a big effect on people. And if you're not in our Shadow Seekers membership, this week we have a flash sale going on. It should be starting tomorrow, and now's a great time to join us if you're interested in learning about that. You can also do cord cutting rituals with your ancestral timeline, or different healing meditations. So kind of thinking about energetically tracing pain back to its source and then sending light energy to that place. So if you you may not even know this. So to kind of to go to like Andrea's question from earlier is like, what if I don't know anything beyond my parents? So one thing you can do is you can do some, research on your ancestors, if that is a pathway that sounds good to you, or or you can do some research on your DNA too, and that can kind of help. You can kind of learn stuff about your ancestors that way. But you don't necessarily have to know about them to do the healing work. You can start to trace back, use your intuition, trace back like my fear back to my mom, back to grandma, and then seeing it, tracing it back to great grandma and great great grandma, and then begin to start to heal. Send intentions of healing backwards through the line. The other thing you can do is you can work with your team, your guides, so spiritual guides, spiritual helpers, animal guides, things like that. Other ancestors that you connect to, and as well as your deities, you can ask deities, how do I help to clear ancestral trauma? I think Hecate is a very good one for working with this, but many of our dark gods and goddesses also can be very good. If you ask them for aid and help in healing the lineage, they will absolutely step up and help you. Then to kind of mention what we saw in the chat, a few people talking about the gifts as well. But let's not forget about reclaiming our ancestral gifts. So this isn't just about the healing of the ancestral traumas, is about reclaiming our gifts. So healing isn't only about our pain, it's also about remembering our magic. So think about this question: what strengths did my ancestors have that I've forgotten? And even if you don't know about your lineage, you can still ask that question. You can pull some cards. You can ask your guides. You don't need to have direct evidence that of any of this. You can use your intuition to try to figure out what strengths did my ancestors have that I've forgotten. Reconnect to herbal knowledge, to crafting, storytelling. Storytelling is a way, like before the internet and all of these gadgets and everything that we have, this is how people passed the time. They spun stories, and that's how ancestral, knowledge was transmitted, and we've lost a lot of that. But like, we can reclaim storytelling. So tell stories about yourself, tell stories about that you can remember about your family. If you do any like research on your DNA, tell those stories, write those in your social media, put them on a blog post, share them in groups. This is something, here's a story I learned about my great great grandpa, or something like that. Our gifts are often beneath the wounds. So when we start to uncover, when we start to like kind of dissolve some of these wounds, we will often find great gifts beneath it. Silence is what is going to conceal our spiritual knowledge. And so one thing that I know is that in my family, once I started to go down some of these other pathways of ancestral work, looking at the land kin, looking at the path kin, I started to, all of a sudden, I started to notice, well, you know what? There's actually pretty spiritual people in my life. And all of a sudden, my relatives, like my uncle, started telling me about things that made me understand that he's intuitive. And then I started thinking about, like, my dad is very good with the stock market. He's made a good amount of money in the stock market, enough that when I was a little kid, he put money in the stock market, and that money paid for my bachelor's and my master's degree because he was so good at it. And so there's some intuition there. We could just say that was skill, but if I look at my uncle, who's very intuitive and started to share with me stories. He was very good in Vegas. He's got a lot of good intuition. And then he revealed to me that my aunt, who crossed through the veils a couple of years ago, was a very intuitive person as well. And then I start to hear stories about my grandma. And then on my other side, my dad's doing this DNA work, and I start to hear stories. He starts to mention, oh, the witches, they came from Cornwall, and that's where our ancestors are from. And I'm like, all of a sudden, there's stuff sort of laying out in front of me. These are pathways that kind of suggest, well, you know what? There were ancestors. I thought that there weren't any, but there were ancestors in my life that had these spiritual gifts. So I guess where I'm going with this is, the silence, when we don't acknowledge it, that's what kind of keeps us stuck. But once you start to open one of these doors and go down one of these paths of ancestral healing, you may notice more of them open up. So I did want to end here just talking about a few kind of ritual and magical practices you could do. So building ancestral altars, if you feel a call to this kind of work, especially as we enter Samhain season in a few weeks, building an ancestral altar, photos, heirlooms, candles, symbols. So you can kind of have that altar. You don't have to have like a full altar. You can put it on the top of a bookcase if you can, or just a place where you can light a candle and leave an offering. Consider leaving daily or weekly offerings like food, flowers, water, and just simply sitting in front of the altar and offering gratitude to your ancestors is a way to start the process, right, of doing the ancestral work. Write a letter to your ancestors. Express to them what you would like to release in the ancestral line. Ask them for wisdom that you are ready to receive, and see what comes through to you after writing that letter. And then you can burn or you can bury that letter as an act of transformation. I kind of already talked about this one, but journeying, visualization. So imagine yourself walking back along your own ancestral line and meeting others in your ancestral lineage. So that can also be kind of a good way to work with the ancestors. And then also gratitude practice. So really feeling grateful that you have the knowledge to do this kind of work, and also feeling grateful for the spiritual gifts that you have been given and for the opportunity to kind of bring this healing forward to your ancestral line. So each time that we heal a wound within us, that healing ripples forward and backward, like I said before. So if you would like to learn more about how you can do this kind of work, I encourage you to join our Shadow Seekers membership. So not only are, like I mentioned, we're doing EFT energy tapping this month, next month we're doing a full workshop on ancestral shadow work. And so this stuff that I'm talking about tonight, this is going to be expanded into a much larger presentation with slides and all kinds of stuff and conversation and discussion. And so I highly encourage you, if you think ancestral work is something you're really interested in, I encourage you to check out our Shadow Seekers membership. So let us now kind of move into the Q&A. So I'm going to go back into the chat and see if there are any questions here. And you can leave some too. It doesn't have to be related to ancestors. You can leave any questions related to shadow work, witchcraft, or energy work. And then I do have a question that someone left for me, and I'm going to address that one as well. So let me see here. So people are kind of saying in the chat different things, different cultures and ancestral cultures that they feel connected to. Cersei said hi to baby Corey. Yeah, it looks like she's settled down now. Cersei said, I always say my grandma taught me how to worry. Yeah, so if you hear yourself saying that, very good chance. There's a reason you're saying it is because it's in the ancestral line. So that would be worry, would be a good thing to kind of work on and see, do some of those like meditations where you sort of trace it back, see the ancestors going backwards, even if you don't know what they look like. Just allow your intuition to open, and then you can kind of send some healing energy back through your ancestral line. Misty said, speaking of ancestors, I once woke up out of a dead sleep to see a wild-looking lady that was only wearing a cloth to cover up, with long hair, deep brown eyes, crouching over me on my nightstand as if she was measuring me up. She moved back and forth, just staring at me, and then she disappeared. I'm not quite sure if she was an ancestor or just a passing spirit or guide or some sort of a goddess. It really startled me at first, but then I just got curious, and then weary of her. But I did not feel in danger in any way. So that's good. It's good that you didn't feel any danger in any way. And it's hard to say. It could be an ancestor. It could be a passing spirit. It could also be a deity. Deities can absolutely show up that way. Okay, my chat keeps jumping on me. Sorry. Jason said, I've got a lot of ancestral healing to do. He said, the first thing my mother and stepfather ever taught me was to be afraid of being. Yeah, so that's where since that's the one that's kind of present, that's the one I would probably work on. Again, don't feel overwhelmed. If the burden feels really heavy, if it feels like there's a lot of work, I suggest just take it a step at a time. If the familial stuff feels hard to do, because maybe it feels like it's going to open up a lot, think about some of the other pathways. So you can do some witch wound work around kind of the path kin. You can do work around your land kin, kind of acknowledging their stories and history and leaving offerings. So sometimes that can help ease people into the ancestral work if the thought of working with their own birth ancestors feels heavy, too heavy. Try some of the other pathways and see if that helps you get into it, right? And then what you may find is that it starts to open up. Okay, now it's time to work with my own inherited lineage. Angela said, my grandfather on my paternal side was a water witch. She had companies paid him to find water. Wow, how cool. That is very cool. Until Aislin said, cool, Angela. He said, my great-grandfather was a healer and was known around town for healing and stopping bleeding, or take fire out of burns. His mom was known as the Witch of Black Creek. Yeah, so cool to learn about that. So, and if you are somebody who, is reading these stories, you're like, oh my God, I don't know anything about my ancestors. It don't despair because you absolutely can learn more. I recommend like my dad learned a lot through the DNA research. So I do recommend that if you have the money and the means to do it, consider it because some of the stuff he learned without even contacting a single person, just getting the stories back and doing the research, he learned so much that we have a my great great grandpa was an orphan and somehow he was like a musician for like really rich families and different things. Like who would have known all of these stories if he hadn't done that research? So if you don't have the stories, consider the research, but you can also in a meditative space close your eyes and let the stories come to you. Ask your ancestors to bring forward some of the stories. Okay, let me just answer this quick question here. But if anybody has more questions, comments, put them in the chat here. So this is a good question that I get asked this one quite a lot. So it's good to answer it every once in a while because I know other people are wondering about it too. So Rachel says that it is all very overwhelming because there's so much information out there. And she says, there's even more bad information, which is very true. She says, where do I start? How do I develop a practice? Just make it make sense. So to try to answer this question in just a few minutes, so I agree, it's very overwhelming. And on one hand, the internet has allowed us to have so much information at our fingertips. On the other hand, it's really hard to wade through it and figure out what is true and what's not true. And you'll find a lot of information that is very conflicting. So what I really recommend people do, especially if you're newer to the path and whether the path you're on is like just witchcraft or it's witchcraft and shadow work or witchcraft, shadow work and energy work, I recommend getting some books on the topic from well-known authors. So I always recommend Christopher Penczak as a good author. Uh, Raven Grimassi, especially if you want to learn about just witchcraft, Scott Cunningham, Starhawk, some of the various different classic authors of modern witchcraft. Get some books and read from the well-known authors. So, I mean, when I came to my path as a witch, it was the like mid to late 90s. I guess a little bit early. Yeah, mid to late 90s. And while the internet was there, it wasn't like it is now. I mean, we went to bookstores, we bought books, and we read from the classic authors. Now it's just like Google, what does this mean? What does this mean? And there's just so much stuff. So if you find authors that you trust, then you have the sources. So even if you see conflicting information on the internet, you know that you trust those specific authors and you can make those decisions for yourself. What's true and what's not true, or what do I resonate with or not resonate with. Also, finding teachers online or groups online that you trust and you resonate with, and then those can be sources for you. And then if other things seem to conflict, well, at least you have sources that you trust. The other thing, though, is building up your own intuition can help you have intuition about whether something resonates or doesn't resonate. Like if you read something that doesn't resonate with you, then that's probably not something for you at that time. And it could be an indication that it's just something that isn't even true, right? Or true for the path that you're on. So that can kind of help with kind of determining what's real, what's not real, what's true, what's not true. To answer the kind of second part of the question, which is the overwhelm, what I have found is that people want to do all the things at once. So we aren't going to be able to do that. That's going to lead people to be overwhelmed. And usually what happens is they just shut down because there's too much. So find out what draws you to the path. Is it tarot and oracle cards and divination? Is it deities? Is it elements? Is it the sabbats and the esbats and the ritual? Is it spellcraft? Is it astrology and numerology? What is it that you're interested in? Start down that path. Create a specialization for yourself. Don't dabble in everything and become good at nothing, right? find a path that really you're drawn to and go down that path. Study divination and get good at it. And you can always come back off that path and go down a different one. But I really recommend, ask yourself what drew you to the path in the first place, or alternatively, if you've been on it a while, what draws you to the path right now? What are you most interested in learning? And make that your course of study right now. And that's going to help you with the overwhelm. You've got plenty of time to learn other things, but this can definitely help with the overwhelm and help you become knowledgeable at something rather than just like kind of, master of none, right? Become a master of something. And then to answer the question about the practice, I recommend that people set up a daily or almost daily practice. We have a video that I did a while back, and I'm going to see if I can very quickly find it here. It was on developing a personal practice. Let's see if I can find it. So what I recommend people do is they try to set up a daily or almost daily practice. So what this can look like is to light a candle every day. That can be a simple thing. Set an intention, light a candle every day, and sit before it for a minute. You could do some candle gazing while you're at it. Alternatively, you could pull a card. You could do a variety of different things. You could do some breath work. You could do some light meditation. So these are all different ways that a person could set up a daily practice. The important thing is that you don't have to do all of this at once. You just have to do something, and you have to do it on most days. And that will help you feel a lot more connected and a lot more spiritual. And I think that will then start to open up other pathways for you. But I cannot stress enough how important the daily practice really is. So I'm trying to find this video as I'm sitting here talking. Here it is. So this was episode 105, and this was from several months ago. I'm going to drop this in the chat. If you're watching back on YouTube later, this will also be in the comments below. So there you go, and that will help you set up a spiritual practice. That's episode 105. It's called The Importance of a Daily Spiritual Practice. So that would be my best go-to advice. Pick what you're here on the path for, begin to study that, find good teachers that you trust and good books that you trust, and kind of have those be your go-to for knowledge and sources. Use your intuition. If something doesn't resonate with you, it's probably not for you at that time, and don't worry about it. And then try to set up a daily spiritual practice or almost daily spiritual practice. Even if it's only 5 minutes and it's lighting a candle, this will really help you along your path. So I hope that helps. I'm going to tell you what's coming up, and then we'll see if there's any further questions or comments in the chat. So coming up next week, I may or may not be doing a live. We will see. I'm going to know in the next few days. The topic of the live is supposed to be encounters with spirits and ghosts, and my good friend Tippy Yunan is going to share. He was a guest on our show back in January. He's going to share some experiences he's had. I'm going to share some of my own, and we're going to chat, and we're going to ask the audience and those who are viewing live and in replay to also share some of their experiences. Now, we may or may not be doing the episode because I will be on no sleep, having come in on a red-eye plane that night or that morning into Boston. So we will see if the episode airs live or not. If it's going to air live, there will be an invite for it very soon. If we are not going to air it live, we're still going to make the video, and then we will make it. We will make it so that you guys can watch it later. So that is coming up on 10/14. On 10/21, I will be back here in LA, and I'm going to be doing an episode on the afterlife in different traditions. So we're going to look at the Egyptian afterlife and the Celtic afterlife, and some of what modern pagans believe. So just in time for Samhain. And then on 10/28, we'll have our episode, A Witch's Guide to Samhain. Our Shadow Seekers membership is opening up for a few days. It should be opening up tomorrow for a flash sale. So if you've been on the fence about joining us, now is a great time as we move into Samhain season. We're going to be doing some ancestral shadow work. We are going to do some work with the third eye and kind of unblocking our intuition. We've got some cool astrology work coming up at the end of the year. So great time to join us. I think we will be open up again at the end of the year, but we haven't been open up for a while. So I wanted to make sure that we gave people a chance to join us now if they are interested in doing more of this work at a higher level. So for those who don't know, Shadow Seekers is where we do our shadow work, energy work, and we kind of learn how to take our spiritual evolution to the next level. And then our Demystifying Witchcraft course, which teaches the foundations of witchcraft, that will be opening up sometime at the end of October or early November. So I'm just going to run into the chat really quick here and see if there's anything else. Cheryl said, I have family trees from both of my parents. It's hard to sort through those. Yeah, I mean, the family trees are probably hard. That's why I think sometimes the ancestral DNA work, I don't know, my dad was able to find a lot of like stories and newspaper articles even that way. So, Aislin said it can be addictive, hours on Ancestry. Okay. Kurt said, do you think those that have passed on can continue to learn and share information either between themselves or back to us? Absolutely. I feel like they learn a lot as they cross through the veils, and they absolutely can be sources of information for us on this side. Amy said, Demystifying Witchcraft is an awesome class. Thank you. Yeah, it's a great course if you guys are interested in learning more about the foundations of witchcraft. Misty said, I believe the soul is always learning. There is just such a massive information in the universe, time, etc. We never really stop learning, whether in human form, elemental form, or spirit form. I totally agree. Okay, so I'm going to sign off now. As always, it is awesome to spend Tuesday evening with you. I will, if I don't see you next week live for that episode, I will see you in 2 weeks. But hopefully we will be live next week, just in a different location. Leave a heart or a thumbs up somewhere in the feed. That helps us get this out to more people. And so make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Body, Mind, Witchcraft, and that way you will never miss a future episode. And until next time, blessed be.